When a young guy mocks a Pogiloy veteran's tattered jacket in a diner, he thinks he's won the room's laughter. But what happens next leaves the entire town speechless. I've walked these roads for longer than most folks in Mill Creek have been alive. The sidewalks are cracked, just like my hands, and the air carries that familiar bite of early spring. Sharp enough to wake you up, but not so cold it drives you inside. Rosie's Diner sits at the edge of town, a squat little place with peeling paint and windows so dusty they blur the world outside. I come here every time I pass through, not for the food, though the bacon's decent, but for the quiet. Or so I thought. Today, that quiet shattered like glass under a boot, and all it took was a kind gesture and this old jacket of mine. My name's Walter Grayson, though nobody in the diner knew that when I pushed through the door that morning, the bell above it jingling like a warning I didn't heed. The place smelled of grease and coffee, the kind that's been sitting on the burner too long. Truckers hunched over their plates, locals swapped gossip, and a gaggle of teenagers in the corner booth laughed loud enough to drown out the jukebox. I took my usual spot at the counter, the far end where the stools wobble less, and wrapped my hands around a chipped mug of black coffee. The warmth seeped into my fingers, easing the ache in my joints. This jacket, green, frayed, older than half the people in here, hung loose on me, the cuffs worn thin from years of use. I didn't think much of it. Never have. It's just a jacket. Same one I wore when I came home from Nam, same one that's carried me through decades since. But to them, it was a target. I noticed her first, the young woman at a table near the window. She was maybe 30, with tired eyes and a toddler fussing in her lap, tugging at her sleeve while she counted coins for the check. Her fingers trembled, not from cold, but from that quiet panic you see when someone's stretching every penny to breaking. I've been there, not with money but with other things. Hope, patience, time. When Brittany, the waitress with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, dropped my bill on the counter, I slid her an extra $10. "Put this toward her tab," I said, keeping my voice low, nodding toward the mother. "Don't tell her it's from me." Brittany's eyebrow arched like she was sizing me up, her gaze flicking over my jacket, my scuffed boots, the lines etched deep in my face. "You sure, Pops?" she said, her voice dripping with something close to pity. "That's a lot of cash for someone like you." I didn't bite, just nodded and took a sip of coffee, bitter as it was. She shrugged, muttered something about me probably being broke, and walked off. I let it slide. I've heard worse. But the sting of her words lingered, like a splinter you can't quite dig out. The diner was loud that morning. The kind of loud that makes you feel invisible. I liked it that way, usually. But then I heard them, those teenagers in the corner, their laughter sharp as a blade. One of them, a broad-shouldered kid with a Letterman jacket and a smirk that screamed trouble, locked eyes on me. His name was Ethan Caldwell. I'd learn that later. But in that moment he was just a boy looking for someone to cut down. "Yo, check out this guy," he said, loud enough to carry over the clatter of plates. He nudged his buddy, a skinny kid with a buzz cut. "What's with the jacket? Looks like he pulled it out of a dumpster." The group snickered, their voices slicing through the air. I kept my eyes on my coffee, my fingers tightening around the mug. I faced worse than words. Bullets, screams, the kind of silence that follows an explosion. But there's something about laughter that cuts deeper when you're old. I figured they'd move on, bored kids looking for a quick laugh. But Ethan wasn't done. He stood, sauntering over to the counter like he owned the place, his sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. "Hey, old man," he called, loud enough for every head in the diner to turn. "You know they got thrift stores for stuff like that, right? Or you just like looking homeless?" His friends roared, and a few patrons chuckled, though some looked away, uncomfortable. Brittany, wiping a table nearby, snorted like it was the funniest thing she'd heard all day. I met Ethan's eyes, steady as I could manage. "Just here for my coffee, son," I said, my voice low, the kind I used to use to calm a nervous recruit. "No need for trouble." "Son," he mocked, leaning closer, his breath smelling of soda and arrogance. "Don't call me that, Grandpa. You're embarrassing yourself sitting here like you belong." He flicked at the sleeve of my jacket, his fingers brushing the frayed fabric like it was something dirty. His friends egged him on, shouting, "Yeah, Ethan, tell him!" The diner went quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like the world's holding its breath. I could feel every eye on me, judging, waiting. Part of me wanted to stand, to say something sharp, but I've learned over the years that words don't always win battles. Sometimes silence is louder. Brittany decided to pile on. "Hey kid, leave him alone," she said. But her tone was more amused than protective, like she was in on the joke. Then she turned to me, her hands on her hips. "No offense, Pops, but maybe you should find somewhere else to loiter. We've got paying customers here." She waved a hand toward the tables, as if my presence was a stain on her day. A few patrons laughed, but the young mother at the table looked down, her face red with shame that wasn't hers. I set my mug down, slow and deliberate, the ceramic clinking against the counter. "I paid for my meal," I said, my voice firmer now, though I kept it even. "And I tipped you extra for that lady over there. I'm not here to cause a scene." I reached for my wallet, but Ethan was quicker. He snatched the bill from the counter, holding it up like a trophy. "Oh, look at this guy, acting like he's got money," he said, waving it for his friends to see. "What's this, your life savings?" The laughter from his booth was deafening, and Brittany smirked, leaning against the counter like she was watching a street performance. My jaw tightened, and for a moment I felt that old fire in my chest, the kind that got me through jungles and gunfire. But I'm not that man anymore. I stood, slow and stiff, and reached for the bill. "Give it back," I said, my voice low, the kind that used to make men listen. Ethan just grinned, dangling it out of reach. "Come on, old man, jump for it," he taunted, and the diner erupted in a mix of laughter and murmurs. I could have grabbed it, could have put that boy in his place with a look or a word. But what's the point? I've fought enough battles to know some aren't worth winning. Still, the humiliation burned. Not for me, but for the years this jacket represents. The men it reminds me of. The ones who didn't come home. I was about to turn away when the door swung open, and a man in a pressed suit stepped inside. He was middle-aged, sharp jaw, briefcase in hand, the kind of guy who looks like he owns the room without trying. His name was Daniel Harper, though I didn't know it then. He stopped, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. Ethan's smirk, my outstretched hand, the bill just out of reach. "What's going on here?" Daniel's voice cut through the noise like a knife through butter. He stepped closer, his gaze flicking from Ethan to me, then to Brittany, who suddenly looked like she'd been caught stealing. "Nothing, just a little fun," she said, her voice too quick, too defensive. Daniel's eyes settled on me, and for a moment, I thought I saw something like recognition, though I'm sure we'd never met. "This doesn't look like fun," he said, his tone sharp enough to make Ethan flinch. He turned to the kid. "Give the man his bill back, now." Ethan hesitated, his bravado cracking like thin ice. He tossed the bill onto the counter with a scoff. "Whatever, man," he muttered, slinking back to his friends who were whispering now, their laughter gone. I picked up the bill, folded it neatly, and tucked it under my mug. "Thank you," I said to Daniel, not because I needed saving, but because he'd done what was right. He nodded, but his eyes lingered on me, like he was trying to figure out why a man in a torn jacket carried himself like he did. Brittany wasn't done, though. As I turned to leave, she called after me, her voice half mocking, half defensive. "Come back when you've got a better jacket, Pops!" The teenagers snickered again, but Daniel's glare silenced them. I didn't answer. I pushed open the door, the bell jingling again, and stepped into the morning light. The air felt colder now, or maybe that was just the weight of their words. I didn't look back, but I could feel the eyes on me. The young mother's, filled with guilt. Daniel's, curious and troubled. And the others, who didn't know what to make of me. I walked toward the Veterans Memorial Park, my boots heavy on the pavement. I wasn't angry. Not really. I've seen too much to let a few kids or a rude waitress get under my skin. But there's a sadness that comes with being invisible, with being judged by the wear on your clothes instead of the weight of your life. I've carried this jacket for 50 years, through mud and blood and homecoming parades that faded into memory. It's not just fabric. It's a promise I made to men who didn't make it back. And today, that promise felt heavier than ever. The streets of Mill Creek stretched out before me, quiet as a held breath, the kind of quiet that feels like the world's waiting for something to break. My boots scuffed against the cracked sidewalk, each step heavier than the last, as I left Rosie's diner behind. The morning air was sharp, nipping at my face, but I pulled my old green jacket tighter, not for warmth, but to hold myself together. That jacket, frayed at the cuffs and now torn at the sleeve, had seen me through worse than a few cruel words. But the laughter from the diner clung to me like damp rot, and I couldn't shake the feeling that today was going to test me in ways I hadn't faced in years. My name's Walter Grayson, and I've learned to keep moving when the world turns unkind. I headed for the Veterans Memorial Park, a small patch of green a few blocks away, where a stone monument and a flagpole stand as quiet sentinels for men like me. I wasn't looking for peace, exactly. Just a place to sit, to let the weight of the morning settle. The park was modest, with benches worn smooth by time and a flag snapping in the breeze like it was trying to say something. I eased myself onto one of those benches, the wood creaking under me, and faced the monument. Its inscription read, "To those who served," followed by names etched in stone, men and women from Mill Creek who'd given more than most will ever know. My name wasn't there. My service was tied to another town, another life, but I felt those names like they were my own. I reached into my jacket pocket, past the tear from the diner, and pulled out a photograph, small and creased, its edges soft from years of handling. It showed me, younger, leaner, standing with my squad in '68, our faces grim but proud, the jungle behind us a blur of green and shadow. I didn't linger on it, too many ghosts in that frame, but I held it for a moment, letting the memory steady me. Then I tucked it away and leaned back, letting the park's quiet wrap around me like an old friend. That quiet didn't last. The grind of skateboard wheels cut through the air, sharp and grating like a saw on metal. A group of kids rolled into the park, maybe 5 or 6 of them, their laughter loud and careless, the kind that makes you feel small if you're not one of them. They weren't the same kids from the diner, but they carried the same swagger, the same need to prove something. The leader, a lanky boy with a backward baseball cap and a smirk that could curdle milk, spotted me first. His name was Jake Morrison. I'd hear it later. But in that moment, he was just another kid looking to make his mark. "Yo, check out this guy," he called to his friends, pointing at me like I was a sideshow. "What's he doing here, guarding the park?" His crew laughed, their voices bouncing off the monument like stones. I kept my eyes on the stone, hoping they'd move on. "Just sitting, son," I said, my voice low, the same tone I'd used to calm men under fire. "You boys enjoy your day." I meant it too. I've got no quarrel with youth, even the loud ones. But Jake wasn't the type to let a chance for a laugh pass by. He skated closer, popping his board up with a flourish that was all show. "Hey, old-timer, you lost or something?" he said, leaning in, his breath smelling of gum and bravado. "This ain't a nursing home." I looked up, my eyes meeting his. "I'm not lost," I said, keeping my tone even, though a flicker of irritation stirred in my chest. "Just here to sit." Jake grinned, sensing a game. He skated a tight circle around my bench, his wheels screeching, his friends cheering like it was a performance. "Come on, man, don't be boring," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "What's with the jacket? You steal it from a museum or what?" The laughter from his crew was sharp, and one of them, a kid with a phone in hand, started recording, his lens trained on me like I was some kind of spectacle. I've faced worse than kids with skateboards, mortars, ambushes, the kind of fear that sits in your bones. But there's a particular sting to being laughed at for something you've carried with pride. I'm not looking for trouble, I said, my voice firmer now, the kind I used when I meant business. But Jake wasn't listening. He grabbed a stick from the ground, twirling it like a baton, and poked at my jacket, snagging the frayed fabric. "This thing's falling apart, dude," he said, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "Why don't you upgrade? Or you too broke?" The laughter grew louder, and a few passers-by stopped to watch, some smirking, others shifting uncomfortably, like they knew this wasn't right, but didn't know how to stop it. Then it happened. Jake's stick caught on a loose thread, and with a quick tug, the fabric tore. A small rip, but enough to make my breath catch. That jacket's been with me through too much to be treated like trash. I stood, slow but steady, my joints protesting but my resolve firm. "That's enough," I said, my voice low, carrying the weight of years I don't talk about. The kid with the phone hesitated, his lens dipping for a moment. But Jake just laughed. "Oh, what? You gonna fight me, Grandpa?" he taunted, tossing the stick aside and stepping closer, his chest puffed out like he was 10 feet tall. "Go back to your bench and chill." Before I could answer, a voice cut through the air, gruff and no nonsense. "Hey kid, back off!" It was Carl Bennett, a burly maintenance worker with a graying beard and a rake in hand, striding across the park like a man who'd seen enough nonsense for one day. He'd been raking leaves nearby, his shirt stained with sweat, and he planted himself between me and Jake, his eyes hard. "You don't talk to folks like that," he said. "Show some respect." Jake scoffed, sizing Carl up like he was weighing his odds. "Relax, man, we're just messing around," he said, glancing at me. "This guy's fine, right?" I didn't answer, just stood there, my hands in my pockets, my eyes on the monument. I've learned that sometimes silence says more than words. Carl wasn't having it. "Mess around somewhere else," he said, pointing his rake toward the park exit. "Go on now." The kids grumbled, their bravado fading, and they skated off, Jake muttering something under his breath as he went. The crowd dispersed, some shaking their heads, others already forgetting what they'd seen. Carl turned to me, his face softening. "You okay, sir?" he asked, his voice rough but kind. I nodded, though the tear in my jacket felt like a wound. "I'm fine," I said. "Appreciate you stepping in." He hesitated, his eyes flicking to the rip in my sleeve. "Kids these days," he said, shaking his head. "No respect. You sure you're all right?" I gave him a small smile, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes. "I've seen worse," I said, and something in my tone made him pause, like he heard the weight behind it. He nodded and went back to his work, but I could feel his eyes on me as I sat back down. The park went quiet again, but the air felt heavier, like a storm was brewing. I was about to leave when a police cruiser pulled up along the street, its lights flashing once before going dark. 2 officers stepped out, a young man with a strut, Officer Ryan Tucker, and a woman, Officer Lisa Monroe, who moved with a quieter confidence. I'd learn their names later, but right then they were just uniforms, and I knew what was coming. A shop owner across the street had called, claiming an older man in a ratty jacket was causing a disturbance. Me. All because I'd dared to sit here. To exist. Ryan approached, his hand resting on his belt like he was looking for a fight. "Sir, we got a report about a disturbance," he said, his tone sharp, like he'd already made up his mind about me. "You need to tell me what's going on here." I looked up, my eyes steady but tired. "No disturbance," I said, "just sitting. Some kids were mouthing off, but it's handled." Lisa, standing a step behind, raised an eyebrow, but Ryan pressed on, his gaze raking over my torn jacket. "Doesn't look handled to me," he said. "You causing trouble with those kids?" I shook my head, keeping my voice even. "I didn't start anything. They were poking at me, that's all." Ryan's smirk said he didn't believe me. "Let's see some ID," he said, his tone carrying an edge that made my jaw tighten. I reached into my pocket, slow and careful, and handed over my driver's license. Ryan studied it like he was looking for a crime in the creases. "Walter Grayson," he read aloud, then tossed it back. "You don't look like you're from around here. What's your business in Mill Creek?" Just passing through, I said, my voice steady despite the burn in my chest. Visiting the memorial. Ryan's smirk grew. Visiting, huh? In that jacket? You sure you're not just hanging around causing problems? Lisa shifted, her discomfort clear, but she didn't speak. The crowd from earlier lingered at a distance, whispering, watching. I could feel their eyes, judging me by the tear in my sleeve, the lines in my face. Carl, still nearby, stepped forward, his rake in hand. Officers, this man wasn't causing trouble, he said, his voice firm. Those kids were harassing him. I saw it all. Ryan turned, his expression darkening. We didn't ask you, he snapped. Stay out of it. Carl bristled, his grip tightening on the rake, but he held his ground. I stood, slow and deliberate, my joints aching but my resolve firm. I don't want any trouble, I said, looking Ryan in the eye. I'll move on if that's what you want. Ryan waved a hand, dismissive. Yeah, maybe you should, he said. This park's for folks who belong here. The words hit like a punch, and for a moment I felt the old pain flare up, not anger, but something deeper, a sadness for a world that forgets so easily. I nodded, tucked my wallet away, and started walking toward the park exit, my boots heavy on the pavement. Lisa watched me go, her brow furrowed, like she wanted to say something but didn't know how. As I reached the edge of the park, a black SUV pulled up across the street, its engine idling low. The driver's window rolled down, revealing a man with a military haircut and a serious face, his eyes locked on me for a moment before flicking to the officers. I didn't see him. I just kept walking, my jacket flapping in the breeze, the tear a reminder of a morning that had started with kindness and ended with judgment. The streets of Mill Creek carried me forward, my boots scraping against the pavement, each step a quiet defiance against the morning's weight. The laughter from the diner, the jeers in the park, the cold dismissal of that young officer. They clung to me like damp leaves, but I kept my head up, my torn green jacket flapping in the breeze. My name's Walter Grayson, and I've learned to carry burdens heavier than words. The tear in my sleeve, fresh from a kid's careless stick, felt like a scar, a reminder of how the world can judge a man by his cover and miss the story inside. I didn't know where I was headed. Not really. Just away from the park, away from the eyes that saw only an old man in a worn-out coat. I turned a corner and found myself in front of the Mill Creek Community Center, a brick building as sturdy and unpretentious as the town itself. A faded sign out front announced a veterans event, some kind of local history gathering to honor those who'd served. The American flag above the entrance snapped in the wind, its colors vivid against the gray sky, and something about it stopped me cold. I adjusted my jacket, the rip catching my eye, and felt a pang, not for the fabric, but for what it meant to me, for the men it reminded me of. I hadn't planned to stay, but my feet carried me inside, drawn to the promise of a place where the past might still matter. The community center was alive with voices, a low hum of conversation that filled the air like a warm hearth. Folding chairs were lined up in rows, facing a podium where a young woman, maybe in her 30s, was fussing with a microphone. Her name was Emily Carter. I'd learned that soon enough. And she had the kind of determined energy that comes from caring too much. The room was a mix of folks, older men and women with military pins glinting on their lapels, families with kids tugging at their hands, and a few locals just there to listen. I slipped into a chair at the back, hoping to blend into the woodwork. My jacket drew a few glances, some curious, some dismissive, but I kept my head down, my hands folded in my lap, the weight of the morning still pressing on my chest. Emily took the podium, her voice clear and warm, like she was speaking to friends. "Thank you all for coming today," she said, her clipboard tucked under her arm. "We're here to honor the veterans of Mill Creek, to share their stories and remember their sacrifices." She gestured to a table nearby, covered with relics of wars gone by. Faded photographs, letters yellowed with age, medals that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The crowd clapped, a polite ripple of sound, and Emily smiled, inviting any veterans in the room to share their stories if they felt moved to. I didn't plan to speak. I just wanted to listen. To feel the weight of shared history for a moment. That moment shattered when the door burst open, loud enough to make heads turn. Ethan Caldwell and his pack of friends from Rosie's Diner strode in, their sneakers squeaking on the polished floor, their laughter cutting through the room like a blade. I recognized Ethan's broad shoulders and that same smirk, the one that had mocked me over my coffee. They'd heard about the event and decided it was another stage for their antics. Ethan's eyes found me in an instant, and his grin widened. "Yo, look who's here!" he called, pointing at me, his voice echoing off the walls. "The jacket guy! What, you think you're a veteran now?" His friends snickered, their laughter sharp and cruel, and a few people in the audience shifted, some confused, others frowning. I sat still, my hands tightening in my lap, my jaw set. I've faced worse than boys with big mouths, but the sting of their words in this place, this sanctuary, hit harder than I expected. Emily's face tightened, her eyes flashing with authority. "Excuse me," she said, her voice firm but controlled. "This is a respectful event. If you're not here to honor our veterans, you need to leave." Ethan just smirked, leaning against a chair like he owned the place. "Chill, lady, we're just having fun," he said, his gaze flicking back to me. "This guy's not a veteran. Look at him, that jacket's a joke." His friends laughed louder, and the room grew tense, the air thick with unease. I could feel the eyes on me, some curious, some embarrassed, and I wondered if I should just walk out. But something kept me rooted. Maybe pride, maybe stubbornness, maybe the memory of men who deserved better than to be mocked in a place like this. Before I could decide, the door opened again, and a man stepped inside, his presence like a sudden storm breaking the heat. He was in his late 40s, his military uniform crisp, his posture rigid, the kind of man who commands a room without raising his voice. Colonel James Callahan, I'd learn later, but in that moment, he was just a figure who made the air shift. The room fell silent, every eye drawn to him, his medals glinting under the lights. He scanned the crowd, and when his gaze landed on me, his eyes widened, just for a fraction of a second, like he'd seen a ghost. Ethan, oblivious, kept going. "What's this, a costume party now?" he said, gesturing at the colonel. "You with the jacket guy or something?" His friends laughed, but it was weaker now, uncertain. Callahan's expression hardened, his jaw tight as he walked to the front of the room, ignoring Ethan completely. He turned to Emily, his voice low but commanding. "Ma'am, may I have a moment?" he asked. Emily, sensing the weight of his presence, nodded and stepped aside, her clipboard clutched tight. Callahan faced the audience, his eyes sweeping over them before settling on me. "I wasn't planning to speak today," he said, his voice steady, carrying the kind of authority that makes you listen. "But I need to set something straight." He looked at me, his tone softening but still firm. "Sir, would you mind standing up for a moment?" My heart thudded, not from fear but from something else, maybe the weight of a past I don't often share. I hesitated, then stood, my joints creaking, my torn jacket hanging loose. The room was silent, the tension so thick it felt like it could snap. Ethan and his friends smirked, thinking this was just another chance to laugh. Callahan reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, his fingers steady. "This man," he said, pointing at me, "is Walter Grayson. In 1968, he served in Vietnam with the 101st Airborne Division. He was awarded the Silver Star for pulling 3 wounded soldiers out of a burning helicopter under enemy fire. He carried one of them 2 miles to safety, despite being wounded himself." The room went still, the air sucked out of it. Ethan's smirk vanished, his face paling as his friends shifted, their laughter gone. Emily's eyes widened, her gaze flicking to the table of memorabilia, like she was realizing something vital was missing. I stood there, my hands in my pockets, the weight of Callahan's words settling over me like a heavy cloak. He wasn't done. "That jacket you're all laughing at?" he said, his voice rising, laced with indignation. "It's the same one he wore when he came home, because he doesn't care about appearances. He cares about duty, about honor." I felt the eyes on me, dozens of them, but I didn't look up. Instead, I reached inside my jacket, past the torn sleeve, my fingers finding the small, velvet-lined case I've carried for years. I opened it, slow and deliberate, revealing the silver star, its ribbon faded, but its weight as heavy as ever. A gasp rippled through the crowd, and a few older men in the front row stood, their faces a mix of awe and recognition. I held the medal up, not for show, but because it felt right, like I was honoring those who didn't make it back. Callahan turned to Ethan, his eyes like steel. "You think it's funny to mock a man like that?" he said, his voice low but cutting. "You owe him an apology. Right now." Ethan's face was red, his bravado crumbling under the weight of the room's stairs. He mumbled something, then forced out a weak, "Sorry," before shoving past his friends and out the door, his crew trailing behind like scolded dogs. The crowd murmured, some shaking their heads, others whispering in admiration. Emily stepped forward, her voice trembling with emotion. "Mr. Grayson, I had no idea," she said, her eyes shining. Would you share your story with us?" The room erupted in applause, veterans and civilians standing, their hands clapping in a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. I hesitated, my throat tight, but I nodded and stepped to the podium, my boots heavy on the floor. I didn't talk about the medal or the helicopter. I talked about my friends, Jimmy, who loved jazz, Mike, who wrote letters home every night, men who deserved to be here more than me. I talked about the promise I made to live with honor, to carry their memory. As I spoke, I noticed Officer Lisa Monroe slip into the room, her uniform crisp but her face troubled. She'd heard about the event from Carl, the maintenance worker, and stood at the back, listening. When I finished, the applause came again, louder now, and several veterans approached, their hands outstretched, some with tears in their eyes. Lisa came up quietly, her voice low. "Mr. Grayson, I'm sorry for what happened in the park," she said. "I should have stepped in." I gave her a small smile, the kind I've given 100 times. "No harm done," I said. "You're here now." She nodded, her respect clear, and stepped back. The event wound down, and I slipped the medal back into my jacket, its weight familiar against my chest. Callahan caught up with me at the door, his hand on my shoulder. "You didn't have to come here today, Walt," he said, his voice quiet but warm. "But I'm glad you did." I nodded, my eyes on the flag outside. "Just passing through," I said, and stepped into the evening air, the flag snapping above me like a salute. The crowd inside buzzed, the story of Walter Grayson spreading like wildfire. Ethan and his friends were gone, their shame a weight they'd carry now. Brittany, the waitress, stood outside Rosie's diner, her face pale as she heard what had happened. Her mockery turned to regret. The young mother from the diner was in the audience, her eyes bright with gratitude as she clapped, knowing I'd paid her bill without asking for thanks. I walked down the street, my torn jacket no longer a mark of shame but a testament to a life lived for others. I didn't need the applause or the recognition. I'd kept my promise, and that was enough.